Sveta, sitting at the bar, had been sipping her only cocktail for the past hour, occasionally casting languid glances at the tipsy men. But today, it was more silent than ever. Nobody was in a hurry to treat the seductively dressed lady with a drink or invite her to their table. Probably, it was time to change the point of dislocation, or as the girl herself preferred to call it, hunting ground. Her target was men, preferably generous and ripe for a serious relationship, and the more solvent, the better. In a word, as Sveta called them, real. But to her great regret and indignation, there were no such men. 90% of the time, it all ended in one night. In the remaining 10, she was waiting for a few more meetings, after which the potential life partner disappeared after learning about her past and the presence of a 7-year-old daughter. Sveta had already lost count of how many such one-time liaisons she had with such unmarried men. In her 25s, Svetlana had a broken marriage and a reputation as a girl unencumbered by social responsibility. How many partners she had had, she herself did not remember. She lost count after the 40th, and she didn't think it was necessary to count them at all. Her body was her business, and no one had the right to judge her for it. A real man doesn't care how many men she's had before him. A real man would make sure he was the last. But for some reason, potential partners didn't share this theory, and everyone else was a total cheapskate. He was slow to pay off her loans. He didn't shower her with gifts, and he didn't run out of his mind to fulfill her wants. In a word, nowadays men are crowded, and with this completely agreed her friend Olga, the same what is called divorcee with a trailer, or RSP. But God, how hurtful that sounds. Children are happiness, even if they're alien and spoiled. A real man takes responsibility for a woman and her child without reproaching her for her past. Moreover, to have a child is a happiness, and it still needs to earn, because the man, when he comes to a woman with a child, should be well aware that he is not on the first roll. Every day he must prove his worthiness to live in such a family. These were the sincere beliefs that Sveta held. In fact, the girl herself did not know exactly from whom she had a daughter, whether from her ex-husband or from the ex before him. Just when she was already meeting with the future spouse, then on a drunken head offered the former to spend the last night. And 2 months later she realized that she was pregnant. After learning about it, Andrew was over the moon with happiness and immediately offered to play a wedding. About his treason, then still a student of teacher training college, naturally kept silent. After all, the father is not the one who conceived and the one who brought up. Although if you admit to yourself, then someone else's child next to her she would certainly not tolerate. They broke up stupidly. Andrei caught his young wife in another adultery, who asked him to come from the shift a day earlier, and even in the morning. They were living so well. He provided them with money and often went on business trips, and she kept the household, and on Fridays, leaving her daughter to her mother, looking for adventure in clubs, not denying herself the attention of other men. That's how her husband caught her with another one-night stand. It was the 3rd time. Sveta thought she would cry again, and he would forgive her. But this time, Andrei simply kicked her out the door, with her things and the baby. In a word, not a man, but a weakling who is not ready for difficulties, sincerely thought the girl. On the questions of acquaintances why they divorced, Sveta fact-cheating concealed and referred to the fact that her husband drank and did not respect her, did not pay proper attention, and she was tired of all the household to pull alone. But the most frustrating thing is that after the divorce, Andrew married a 2nd time and dared to be happy with some grey mouse, studying to be a pediatrician, while Sveta did not finish college because of pregnancy. And, according to friends, they had already bought the car that the girl herself dreamed of. That pissed me off the most. And as a result, by the age of 22, Svetlana was left alone with a child in her arms and without means of subsistence, if you do not count alimony. And for the 3rd year she was looking for female happiness in bars and round-the-clock cafes, drowning in alcohol and disposable connections. But despite her attempts, no one was in a hurry to call her to marry. What was the reason? Sveta did not understand. There was only one explanation. All men are assholes, and there are simply no normal ones left. Svetlana again ran through the hall, and her gaze stopped on a tall, smiling brunette sitting in a semi-dark corner. Noticing her gaze, the man smiled even wider and bowed his head gallantly in greeting. At first, Sveta didn't even believe the nod was addressed to her. She, of course, considered herself the queen of beauty, but the hobby of hops took its toll, and as a result, the girl had a small pot belly under a tight, short pink dress. But the chance was not to be missed, and she gave a nod. And what was the dyed blonde's surprise when the man got up and headed in her direction? For the first time in a long time, Svetlana's heart sped up frantically. Surely this smartly dressed and trim, handsome man was interested in her. And even if it was just another one-night stand, she would agree. She'll have something to tell Olga. She had just gone to a sauna today with another beau and a few of his friends. The man came to the counter and once again bowed his head in a friendly manner and said, "I see you're bored. Can I keep you company?" His voice was pleasantly low, authoritative, a real alpha male. Sveta mumbled something confusedly and pointed to a nearby bar stool. She felt like an inexperienced schoolgirl who had been asked to dance for the first time. And then everything started to snowball. Vsevolod ordered several cocktails, not forgetting to compliment the girl. He complained about his loneliness and the fact that in this city it is very difficult to find a companion for a serious relationship. And she just melted from his words and wondered when he would call her to visit. But the most interesting thing is that the man, even though he bought alcohol, he himself drank only water with lemon. But that's even better. If things work out, a teetotaling husband is just perfect, and especially if he doesn't forbid her from drinking. But closing time was approaching, and Vsevolod was still in no hurry to call Sveta to him, and that was frustrating. Desire was already inflaming her heart, moving lower, especially after the man touched Sveta's hand, seemingly unintentionally. There was a spark between them, literally. The girl felt a certain energy tickling her palm for a brief moment, but the closing time was inexorably rushing forward, and the handsome alpha was in no hurry to call for a visit. And when a saddened Svetlana decided that all was lost, he asked for her phone number. Without thinking, she, of course, gave it. They sat until the closing of the institution, and after, Vsevolod drove Sveta home. And as if it did not seem strange, did not even ask for a visit, although she was already ready. Coming home, the girl was even a little upset. It was the first time in her life that she had been stood up. It seems that happiness is not for her, and it was all her ex-husband's fault. The asshole. Oh, how she hated that happily remarried asshole. Be that as it may, and 3 days later, Svetlana received a phone call from an unfamiliar number, and the man on the other side introduced himself as Vsevolod. He suggested going to a restaurant in the evening, not in a cafe or for a beer, but in a real restaurant. Sveta agreed. To her surprise, the man preferred one of the most expensive places in the city and left the choice of dishes to her. Moreover, he hinted opaquely that he had no problems with finances. Not believing her happiness, the girl tried lobster and black caviar for the first time, not forgetting the natural French wine. The man himself contented himself with a steak with blood and water with lemon. Having ordered strawberry panna cotta for dessert, Sveta decided to take the initiative and offered to finish the evening at her place. The man agreed, and then everything happened like in a romantic movie. Arriving home, they immediately found themselves in each other's arms. Surprisingly, Vsevolod was in excellent physical shape for his 38 years. He turned out to be a tender and sensual lover, and extremely tireless. And closer to morning, the couple, looking at the emerging dawn, had a long talk. It turned out that the man worked in a certain firm as a director. He was widowed a year ago. His wife died in a car accident. Doesn't drink alcohol, just doesn't like the taste. but he has nothing against drinkers. He doesn't smoke and does sports. And most importantly, has no children. About her own daughter, Svetlana decided not to talk yet, in order not to scare off a potential spouse. Moreover, he himself did not ask, just like he didn't ask about his exes. And that's what she liked most of all. Finally found a real brave man who would not poke his nose in her long list of partners. Their relationship developed rapidly and beautifully. Vsevolod spared no expense. He helped her pay off all her loans and even gave her a new washing machine and an Austrian closet. In short, a real man. But there was only one problem: how to tell him about his daughter so as not to scare him off. And after 2 months of guest relations, Svetlana finally decided. That evening, Sveta invited Vsevolod home for a frank conversation. She set the table and cooked dinner. To be honest, she was an extremely mediocre cook, and therefore, half an hour before his arrival, she decided not to take any risks, and instead of her own strepny, 2 salmon steaks, ordered from the nearest restaurant, appeared on the table. The girl was literally shaking before the upcoming conversation. She was afraid that Vsevolod would become furious at her reticence and leave immediately, slamming the door loudly. And then cried her hopes for a happy, trouble-free future. But this time, too, the man accepted the information with a smile and reassured that there are no strangers' children. Svetlana could not believe her happiness. He was just perfect. The perfect partner she had been looking for so long, carefully going through countless options. And on top of everything, Vsevolod offered no longer to visit her and move in with him. Especially at him, without a woman's hand, empty 2-story cottage in an elite area of the city. But there was one condition. At first, the daughter will stay with her grandmother. Just a little bit of how they will get together characters, and he would not want to traumatize the child. The girl will get used to it and will start calling him daddy, and God forbid they split up. Then not only Sveta will be worried, but also little Vika, and gallant and caring Vsevolod would not want that. Thinking briefly, the girl agreed. After all, she has the right to female happiness. The very next day, glowing with happiness, Sveta unpacked her things in a 2-story cottage in an elite neighborhood. But the pleasant surprises did not end there. Sewa, as she already called her partner, offered her not to look for a job. He had enough money. Oh, how long Sveta had waited for this. She simply hated working. Having no education, she was offered at most a position as a cashier in another chain. But she didn't stay in the stores for long. No one wanted to keep a careless and lazy employee, sometimes coming to work with a persistent smell of booze. But for the sake of a prosperous life with an ideal man, she could become a good, diligent, and loving wife, providing comfort and order in the house. But of course, only at first. After a few months, we'll refer to the large area of the house and suggest using the services of a housekeeper. And food can always be ordered in a restaurant, as long as there was money, and just in this, Vsevolod had no problems. So began Sveta's life, as in a romantic fairy tale. But as you know, happiness is not eternal. So it happened, in this case. Little by little getting used to the good life, Svetlana began to notice the strangeness of her ideal partner. It was that sometimes he smelled of damp earth, or even earthworms, even though the man washed every night and groomed himself meticulously. Sveta had never met a guy who used not only face creams, but body creams as well. According to Seva's words, he had dry skin, and sometimes it cracked. And that was true. Rarely, but there were cracks on his face, mostly in the area of the nose and lips. But this moment was a minor flaw in an ideal man, and Sveta simply turned a blind eye to it. After all, who else will fully provide her with money, will take her with a child, and will not, as an insecure hubby, dig into the past? But there was more. Sveta noticed this unpleasant odor more and more, especially at night. Luckily for her, this stench appeared rarely, and then closer to the full moon, as Sveta noticed. Then she cited a headache and went to sleep in another room. Vsevolod didn't mind. He respected her boundaries and choices. Time passed, and the man was still in no hurry to invite Svetlana's daughter to live with them. It was a little alarming. Sveta brought up the conversation about moving several times, but Seva dodged the dialogue. He said that they didn't know each other yet, and they had to get used to each other, and just let their honeymoon last a little longer. They'd still have time to dive into everyday life. The girl agreed, of course, but something was still bothering her. Something was troubling her. Something was wrong. And so, after 3 months of living together, there was a rather strange episode. Having had a wonderful dinner of made-to-order pasta and a bottle of wine, Sveta relaxed, and without waiting for her lover, fell asleep. She was literally knocked out, and the girl did not hear Vsevolod return from work. At night, she woke up from a persistent feeling of someone else's presence. And when sluggishly opened her eyes, she cried out in surprise. Vsevolod literally hovered over her and stared emotionlessly into her eyes. His face was like stone, emotionless. It seemed eerie in the night, frightening and repulsive. The girl jumped out of bed and asked what he was doing, to which Seva smiled and said in his low velvet voice, "Nothing, sweetheart. Just admiring you. I came home from work and you didn't wait for me, so I decided not to wake you up." At that moment, the room was filled with the stench of damp earth and earthworms. Suddenly, Sveta felt heavy in her chest, dizzy, and almost fainted. The man swiftly jumped up to her and held her down, then escorted her to another room and offered to spend the night there. Sveta, only agreeing, nodded. But in bed she could not understand why Seva, if he was admiring her, he did not do it lying on his side, and stood on all fours, literally looming over her. Well, even in a perfect man there are oddities. But her happiness, and Vicky's happiness, were far more precious than such trifles. Except these little things began to gain momentum. Svetlana woke up the next morning a wreck. Her whole body was humming. It felt like she had worked a 12-hour shift at the store, like when she had to put up several pallets of fruit alone, without movers. And on top of it all, she felt lonely, empty, like all the joy had been drained out of her overnight. But she knew how to fight it. Sneaking away from Vsevolod, Sveta called Olya, and they took alcohol. Sharing her worries, the girl did not see support in the eyes of her best friend. On the contrary, she sang dithyrambs to the ideal man for a long time and called Sveta a fool. Everyone would like to be in her place, and frankly admitted that would not refuse and herself. It was a scandal. Svetlana threw her friend out. It would not be enough that this lard, Olya, began to make eyes at her Seva. Left alone with her speculations, the girl became even sadder. Now she lost her only friend. Left alone with her speculations, the girl felt even sadder. Now she had lost her only friend. Over time, Svetlana's health began to deteriorate. She not infrequently woke up with chest pains. Her heart was pounding, a pressure in her temples. It seemed that gradually her life was leaving her, slowly but surely, like sand through her fingers. One fine morning, Sveta went to the mirror and did not recognize herself. She had gotten visibly thinner, but this thinness was more painful than attractive. The luster of her gray eyes was gone. Her skin had taken on a pale hue, and in general, in the reflection on her looked alien and exhausted aunt, not a 25-year-old girl. After consulting with acquaintances, Svetlana decided to go to oncology. The examination, fortunately for Svetlana, revealed nothing. She turned out to be absolutely healthy, and some indicators were even higher than normal. Doctors only spread their hands, suggesting a possible reaction of the body to stress, although there was no reason to worry, except for the strange odor from Vsevolod. Without finding out the cause of her indisposition, the girl returned to Vsevolod's house. There she shared her worries with him. Courteous Seva listened to her attentively and suggested more rest and a change of diet. Just as she said, for rosy cheeks and vigor of spirit, to give up wine and switch to cognac. Allegedly, grape brandy is better for health than all other drinks, but only in small quantities. And soon, chicken breasts, seafood, and fresh vegetables appeared in the refrigerator, replacing beef, pork, and the often ordered pizza. But it wasn't helping much. Svetlana was literally fading away. One evening, Sveta wished to take a bath. She turned on the warm water to warm up the cast iron tank for water procedures. For some reason, Seva, despite his finances, preferred Soviet plumbing. Having changed into a robe, the girl slowly made her way to the kitchen to fill a glass with cognac, on the advice of her civilian husband. And when she returned to the bathroom, she stopped on the spot and almost dropped the glass. On the surface of the water floated some strange and disgusting wrinkled films. The girl, having sipped her skate, put the glass on the edge of the sink and, going for a mop, picked up the strange find. The scraps hung limply on the aluminum tube, and the warm water flowed thin streams back into the warming bathtub. Sveta stared at the tape for a long time and couldn't figure out what it was. Thank God that Vsevolod should be back soon and he would probably figure it out. Half an hour later, the owner of the house came. He reacted to the find with merriment and laughter. As he said, sometimes he cuts the excess skin off his heels, for hygienic purposes. He hugged Sveta and kissed her tenderly, reassuring her that nothing terrible had happened. He simply forgot to clean up after himself. Because now, it's not only my house, but also yours, and I still cannot get used to the fact that I live not alone. And with such a beautiful wife, gently cooed the brunette, hugging the girl. But there was something wrong about it. After all, Sveta herself used to take care of the heels, and there was not much cut off. And she'd fished out a few transparent films the size of souls, and a man has 2 feet, not 5. She wrapped the strange scraps in paper and threw them in the trash. As her first crush passed, Svetlana began to notice more and more oddities in her ideal man. And then, that very night, Svetlana woke up to a very unusual kiss. Seva, having waited for her to pass out from a few glasses of brandy, strongly dug into her lips, and as if he was sucking the air out of her. It was as if he was trying to suck it out. The girl cried out fearfully and pushed the man away from her. She tried to get up, but her body weakened and did not obey in her sleep. At the second attempt, Svetlana got to her feet, but her head went round, her eyes went dark, and she fell down exhausted. Svetlana came to her senses only in the morning. To her surprise, Vsevolod had not gone to work. He sat opposite the bed and waited for the girl's awakening. And as soon as she opened her eyes, he immediately showered her with his affection and care. "My love, you don't know how you scared me. I just couldn't go to the office knowing you weren't feeling well. Why don't I order you something nice? You want a couple salmon steaks? What was that last night? It was like you were sucking the air out of me." Sveta asked tiredly and not fully awake. Vsevolod at first faded for a moment, became stern and frowning, and then instantly blurred into a good-natured smile and spoke quickly, gesturing vigorously with both hands. "Hey, it's nothing special. I just love you a lot. And that's why when you sleep, I kiss you so hard and passionately. I cherish every bit of you, every second of your precious time. I just want to dissolve into you and be one with you for the rest of my life." And he kissed her passionately. When he pulled away from her lips, the man gently stroked her cheek and whispered, "I'll go order something, and you rest. And don't worry. Everything will be fine." Vsevolod left the room, and Svetlana turned on her side and looked out the window. Lily clouds slowly flowed across the clear blue sky. Is he who he says he is? Sveta thought anxiously. More and more she noticed inexplicable strangeness in her ideal partner. And Vika, she had not seen for 3 weeks. Why Vsevolod does not want his daughter to live with them? But remembering the past poor life, soaked with cheap alcohol and dozens of worthless men, Svetlana sighed sadly. All these oddities pale in comparison with the perpetually drunk and grimy laborers who got in her way. No, for the happiness of herself and her daughter, she would accept his unusual oddities. But every day the situation became worse and worse. Sometimes Sveta could not even find the strength to get out of bed. Seva called an ambulance at home, but they only spread their hands. On another day, the girl opened her eyes and realized that she could not get out of bed. The sheets and blanket were soaked with sweat. Sveta felt sicker than ever. She slowly turned her head toward the hall and tried to call out to Seva, but instead of words, a hoarse moan came from her lips. Her ligaments were dry and unwilling to obey, but as if sensing her efforts, Vsevolod came out himself, carrying a glass of water. "You don't look well at all, sweetie. I think you're losing your strength. Have a drink. You'll feel better." The girl obediently drained the glass and, returning it to her common-law husband, quietly said, "Honey, Call an ambulance. Something I do not feel good at all. But for the first time, the man instantly changed in his face and acquired stern, even frightening features. No, there's no need for an ambulance. But after a couple of seconds, he became soft again and stretched out in a snow-white smile. There's no need for an ambulance, my dear. I know what you need. They're all losers there. They're useless. They take a long time. They don't know what to do. Remember, did they ever help you? That's what I'm saying. Remember that when I feed you goodies, you get better, even if it's just a little bit. I know what you need. Oh, I should have known better. You need to eat a lot of calorie-dense food. I'm ordering your favorite sushi, pizza, and marble beef steak. And you should be on bed rest. It's just anxiety. You and I are still getting along. You miss Vika, so you're burning out. But nothing, as soon as you get better, we'll take our daughter with us. And we'll live as one happy family. So just rest and don't think about anything. Everything will be fine. Sveta wanted to object, but she did not have the strength to do so. She tried to get up, but the damp bed literally sucked her in. Except to turn her head and raise herself on her elbows, the girl could do nothing. Svetlana escorted the man with a look, and herself covered her eyes. Literally for a couple of seconds, but it was enough to pass out. Svetlana was awakened by a gentle but insistent tugging on her shoulder. She was awakened by a smiling Seva holding a tray with a weighty set of rolls in his right hand. The girl had no appetite, but the man insisted. You must eat, or you won't have the energy. You won't have energy. He coaxed softly, stroking the girl's sweat-damp hair. His touch sent electric chains of goosebumps running through her body. I wanted to obey, and having done what he asked, just go to bed. Sveta, without much appetite, began to eat one's favorite rolls well, and Seva carefully watched the meal. And as soon as she had finished half of the set, the man suggested a change of dishes and brought several large slices of rather caloric pizza. The girl tried to refuse, but he insisted again. Seva forced her to eat, through caressing and persuasion. On the second slice, the girl's nose gagged. She literally began to pass out. Then the man kissed Sveta and suggested she sleep. Have a good night's sleep, sweetie. Be strong. I need you very much. And taking the rest of the food, left the bedroom. As soon as the door slammed shut, Svetlana immediately fell into a dream, more like a delirium. She was thrashing about the bed. Sweat was literally running from her. Sveta was both freezing and feverish at the same time. Everything resembled the worst hangover after a week-long binge. Her heart was pounding somewhere between her shoulder blades, making it hard to breathe. It seemed as if she was about to say goodbye to her life. Sveta passed out and came back to consciousness after Seva woke her up. He was once again extremely insistent in offering her food. He was literally force-feeding the girl. After only a third of a marble beef steak, Sveta silently pushed the dish away from her. She couldn't eat anymore. Then Vsevolod kissed her tenderly and suggested that she sleep some more. And if nothing changed by morning, he would personally take her to the hospital and put everything upside down if they didn't find out the reason for her withering. Smiling sadly, the unfortunate woman nodded tiredly and without waiting for her lover to leave, fell back into a dream more like a delirium. By nightfall, it was getting worse. Now the delirium was most obvious, tangible. Sveta saw hallucinations. Purple worms the size of cats were crawling along the white ceiling. They moved their crooked legs and made a kind of squeaking noise that cut her hearing. A pink kite landed on the windowsill and, tapping its beak 3 times on the window, quirked. Gotta go. It's time for you to go. It's time. The door to the bedroom opened, and in walked a completely naked Vsevolod. But this time he wasn't smiling. He was stern and frowning, and streams of water ran down his body, leaving puddles on the floor. The man had recently taken a bath. The room was filled with a stinky and cloying amber of the perfume of damp earth and earthworms. But another odor interfered, a strange and unfamiliar odor, like the smell of a wet old cloak. The man looked indifferently at Sveta and, turning to the wall, began to move his hands, making a sound that was both lingering and clattering at the same time, as if it were being uttered not by one person, but by an insect. And then he dug his fingers into his chest and tore the skin on it, sprinkling the entire wall with blood. The girl tried to raise herself up on her elbows and realized with horror that this was not a delusion, nor a dream. The Korshun and the worms really were not there, but Vsevolod, tearing his chest, was. She tried to scream, but only an exhausted moan. And the perfect man at this moment did not pay the slightest attention to her. He smeared his blood on the wall and with even more force began to howl a hellish cacophony. The silk wallpaper on the wall began to float, shimmering, and after a few seconds, it seemed to melt away, making way for something dark and pulsating and round. It grew, and soon, a dark funnel formed in the wall. Jets flowed down Vsevolod's body again, but this time not water, but pink slime. The man groaned and began to peel off his skin. The dermis peeled away from his body, revealing the true face of the perfect husband. Piece by piece, scrap by scrap, he peeled off the skin as if it were an unnecessary disguise, and after a few minutes, a fully bloodied human hide lay at his feet. The one who was her beloved Sveta flinched a couple of times and, in no hurry, turned around. Sveta wanted to scream in horror but could only moan exhaustedly. An insect-like creature was staring at her, clutching thin paws to its chest, while red tentacles vibrated from its abdomen and diaphragm, wriggling. The creature blinked several times with its black fly-like eyes, and snapping its jaws, began to sway, approaching the girl. The unfortunate woman found her strength and called loudly for help. The insect-like thing shook its aunt's head negatively and quickly, gurgling, mouthed, "Don't even try. It won't work. I bought a house in a high-end neighborhood for a reason. Nobody cares about each other." Then the creature leaned over to Sveta and licked its white, bifurcated tongue. "Remember, you hid your daughter from me at first. Sweetie, I haven't been completely honest with you either. I have children too, and now you're about to meet them." After saying that, something came out of the portal, something small and worm-like. This something squeaked loudly and, like a blind kitten, began to move its face in the air. Then, out of the darkness of the funnel, it showed half of its body. It was long, red, and had many tentacle legs. Unlike Sveta, these things had paws that grew all around their belly button on both sides. And abruptly silent, the small insect-like worm crawled out completely and quickly shuffling his feet, rushed towards Svetlana, screaming with horror. Soon he was already standing on his hind legs and looked at the frightened girl with interest, and the exhausted victim could not even raise his hand to throw this something off the bed. Then a second one appeared out of the portal, followed by a third, and in a minute and a half, there were at least a dozen red worms standing on their hind legs around the bed. The once beloved Sveta looked at the children with his black eyes, spread his arms and spoke proudly, "These are my babies, my sons. Zaya, see how amazingly we change when we enter your world. When they grow up, they'll be like me, and just like me, they'll eat people. You've probably figured out why you've been losing weight by now, haven't you? No, I was the one who drank the life out of you. You people see and understand everything, but in the pursuit of mythical happiness, you turn a blind eye to everything. How easy it is to be seduced by silly words and material values. We've been buying you for centuries. We trade your life for cheap trinkets, and you fools will fall for it. But you will serve me well, or rather my children. You still have a little life left in you, just enough for my little sunshine babies to eat. So be a good mom, relax, and give what you still have." After those words, the creature stood with a slimy knee on Sveta's chest and forcefully opened its mouth with its paws. First one, then the second, and then the third, worms began to run up to the girl and as if to suck the air out of her. And when the last one drank, Svetlana was no longer breathing. Soon the insects left the house, returning to the portal. Sveta wiped the floor and hid for half an hour in the bathroom, together with the skin in his hands. From there, he came back out in human form. There weren't even any scars at the laceration sites. Then the man tuned out, dialed the ambulance number, and hysterically mouthed hysterically, sometimes shouting, oh God, come quickly, my baby, she's dead. I don't know what happened. She just stopped breathing. I beg you, do something. Save her, save her. The morgue couldn't determine the cause of the young girl's death. They wrote it all off as sudden death syndrome, peculiar only to children under a year old. At the funeral, Vsevolod was inconsolable. He stared blankly at Sveta's coffin and silently dropped tears. Vsevolod shook his aunt's head and quickly, gurgling, mouthed. To comfort him, Olga came up to him and took the man's hand. And then it was like a flash, like lightning. A spark ran between them, pleasantly tickling her palm. From surprise, the girl pulled her hand away, and strange thoughts filled her head. Olga looked at the beautiful man and faintly said, Vsevolod, if it will be hard and need someone to talk to, call at any time. I will be glad to support you. The man only replied with a brief nod. For a moment, Olya felt dirty and fallen, but then the excuse came of its own accord. So what if he was almost the husband of her dead friend? Sveta cannot return, and he, Seva, needs support. And the main thing now is that he is a lonely, perfect man.